He twisted it. Hard. There was a sickening pop of cartilage. Matteo shrieked, dropping to his knees. The whiskey glass shattered on the marble floor. Alessandro didn't let go. He held Matteo there, kneeling in the glass and the spilled alcohol, forced to bow before us. "You do not touch her," Alessandro said. He wasn't shouting. He was pronouncing a sentence. "You do not look at her. You do not speak her name." "You're crazy," Matteo gasped, clutching his wrist. "She's nothing. She's just a bet I lost." Alessandro released him with a shove that sent Matteo sprawling backward. Then, Alessandro turned. He didn't look at his brother. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the Dons, the wives, the rivals. He walked to the stage where the orchestra was waiting. He took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second, then silence. He looked out at the room, searching until his eyes found mine. I stood alone in the center of the floor, the burgundy dress blazing like a beacon. "There have been rumors," Alessandro said, his voice amplified, filling the cavernous hall. "Rumors that the Versiani family is unstable. Rumors that I am acting without reason." He paused. "Let me be clear. The fire in Brooklyn was an act of cowardice committed by a man who cannot accept defeat. It was an attack on a civilian." He stepped off the stage and walked toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me. He took my hand, the one that wasn't trembling, and raised it. "Clara Mitchell is not a prisoner," Alessandro declared, his voice ringing with power. "She is not a victim. She is under the personal protection of the Versiani head of family. This means that her debt is my debt. Her enemies are my enemies. And her safety?" He looked at Matteo, who was being helped up by 2 embarrassed security guards. "Is my only priority." Alessandro looked back at me. "Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me. Anyone who touches her, declares war on me. And I have never lost a war." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles, right over the spot where I had burned myself on the oven rack days ago. It wasn't a showy kiss. It was a seal. A blood pact made in front of 500 witnesses. "Get him out of here," Alessandro ordered the security team, gesturing to Matteo. "He is no longer welcome at family events." "You can't do this," Matteo screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. "I'm your blood. She's just a girl." "She is a queen," Alessandro said coldly. "You are a drunk." They dragged Matteo out. The doors closed behind him, cutting off his shouts. The silence that followed was terrified, reverent. Alessandro looked at me. "Are you all right?" he whispered, away from the microphone. I looked at him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would bruise my ribs. He had just claimed me. Not in secret, not in a car, but in front of the entire world that mattered to him. He had exiled his own brother for me. "I'm fine," I breathed. "I'm better than fine." "Good," he said, "because I need air." He took my elbow and guided me not back to the crowd, but toward the French doors that led to the terrace. The crowd stepped back, bowing their heads slightly as we passed. They weren't looking at the baker anymore. They were looking at the boss's woman. We stepped out onto the stone balcony. The winter air hit us instantly, freezing and sharp, but after the heat of the ballroom, it felt clarifying. The city lights of Manhattan sprawled out before us, a grid of gold and diamonds. Alessandro walked to the stone railing and gripped it, staring out at the city. I watched him. I saw the way his chest heaved, the way the adrenaline was slowly bleeding out of him, leaving him raw. I walked over and stood next to him. I didn't say anything. I just placed my hand over his on the cold stone. He turned his hand over and gripped mine, lacing our fingers together. "I didn't plan the speech," he admitted, his voice low. "It was a good speech," I said. A bit dramatic, but effective. He let out a short, dry laugh. "I broke his wrist. My mother would be ashamed." "Your mother would be proud that you stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves," I said softly. He was going to hurt me, Alessandro. Not physically, maybe, but he wanted to strip me of my dignity. He wanted to make me feel small. He succeeded with the fire, Alessandro said. I wasn't going to let him succeed tonight. He turned to face me, blocking the wind with his body. He looked down at the necklace, his grandmother's necklace, resting against my skin. You asked me once why I intervened, he said. Why I took you from the ball. Why I paid the debt. You said it was to secure your assets, I reminded him. I lied. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face. He reached out and tucked it behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my jaw. His touch was hot, searing against the winter chill. I did it because I wanted to, he confessed, the words torn from him. I did it because when I saw you in that silver dress, dancing with a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, I felt something I haven't felt in 10 years. What? I whispered, my breath misting in the air between us. Possessive, he said. Territorial. Alive. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between us. My back pressed against the stone railing. There was nowhere to go, and I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't save you to settle a score, Clara. I saved you because the thought of you belonging to anyone else, it made me want to burn the city down myself. My heart stuttered. This was it. The line. We were crossing it. And now? I asked. Everyone inside thinks I belong to you now. They think I'm yours. He looked at me, his eyes dark and endless, filled with the reflection of the city lights and a hunger that could consume worlds. Let them think, he whispered, leaning down until his lips were hovering millimeters from mine. But tell me, Clara, do they think right? I looked at the man who had rebuilt my life from the ashes, the man who had faced down his own blood to protect my honor, the man who made me feel like a queen in a velvet dress. I reached up, tangling my fingers in the hair at the nape of his neck. Yes, I breathed. He didn't hesitate. He crashed his mouth down on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was fire and ice, velvet and steel. It was the taste of danger and the promise of safety. He kissed me like he was starving, and I kissed him back with everything I had. All the fear, all the gratitude, all the anger at the world, pouring it into him. His arms wrapped around me, lifting me slightly off the ground, crushing me against his chest. I felt the gun holster under his jacket, the hard muscle of his chest, the frantic beating of his heart that matched my own. For a moment, on that balcony, there was no mafia, no debt, no Matteo. There was just us, the baker and the boss, rewriting the rules of the game. When he finally pulled back, we were both gasping for air. His forehead rested against mine. Let's go home, he growled. Yes, I said. Let's go home. But as we turned to leave the terrace, a shadow moved in the corner of my vision. A flicker of movement from the street below. I looked down, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street and the waiting cars. I shivered, but Alessandro wrapped his coat around my shoulders, pulling me into his side. I have you, he promised, and for tonight, under the burgundy velvet and the winter stars. I believed him. I had picked the right brother, and I was never, ever giving him back. The storm that battered the Versiani estate that night felt less like weather and more like a premonition. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the east wing's balcony doors, the sound rhythmic and violent, drowning out the silence that usually suffocated the mansion. I lay in the center of the massive bed, staring up at the intricate plaster molding of the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. My body was exhausted, drained by the adrenaline of the gala and the emotional whiplash of the last 48 hours. But my mind was a live wire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alessandro on the balcony. I felt the rough stone railing against my back, the biting winter wind on my face, and the searing heat of his mouth on mine. It hadn't been a performance. The speech in the ballroom might have been calculated to silence the commission. But the kiss, that was raw. It was acclaiming. I touched my lips, half expecting them to still feel bruised. He hadn't come to my room tonight. After we returned from the city, he had retreated to his study in the West Wing, claiming he had urgent calls to make regarding the fallout with Matteo. He had kissed my forehead at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes dark and heavy with unsaid words, and told me to lock my door. "Sleep," he had ordered, though he looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. "I will secure the house." I had obeyed. I had locked the heavy oak door, engaged the deadbolt, and even propped a heavy chair under the handle. A habit from my days living alone in a bad neighborhood in Brooklyn. It felt silly in a fortress like this, guarded by men with earpieces and assault rifles, but old habits died hard. I turned over, burying my face in the silk pillowcase that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. The storm outside intensified, a crack of thunder shaking the floorboards. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I strained my ears, listening through the drumming of the rain. The mansion was old. It settled and groaned like a living thing. It was probably nothing. Probably just the wind. But the hair on the back of my arms stood up. It was that instinct again. The same one that had screamed at me in the ballroom before I even knew Mateo was the wrong brother. I sat up slowly, clutching the duvet to my chest. The room was pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the furniture in ghostly bursts of white light. The handle of my bedroom door turned. It was a slow, deliberate movement. The metal latch clicked, hitting the resistance of the deadbolt. Then silence. "Alessandro?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He wouldn't try to enter without knocking. He had been scrupulously respectful of my space since I arrived. He treated the East Wing like a sanctuary he wasn't allowed to violate. There was a pause. Then, a scratching sound. Metal on metal. It sounded like a pick working the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. Security had the master keys. Alessandro had the key. No one needed to pick a lock in their own house. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. I didn't run to the door. I ran to the bedside table. I opened the drawer with shaking hands and pulled out the taser Alessandro had given me 3 days ago. "It is not a toy," he had said, pressing the cold plastic into my palm. "It delivers 50,000 volts. If anyone touches you who isn't me, you use it. You do not hesitate." I gripped the weapon, flipping the safety off. The small red light blinked to life in the darkness. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. I backed away toward the balcony, putting the heavy armchair between me and the door. The chair I had propped under the handle scraped against the floor as the door was pushed open. A figure stepped into the room. Lightning flashed, illuminating him for a split second. It was Alessandro. He was wearing the same black dress shirt he had worn earlier, unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled up. His hair was messy, wet, as if he had been out in the rain. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing, filling the frame. I lowered the taser slightly, relief washing over me so intensely it almost made my knees buckle. "Alessandro," I breathed, letting out a shaky laugh. "You scared me. Why did you pick the lock?" I would have opened it. He didn't answer. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him softly. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I didn't want to wake you," he whispered. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the storm. He walked toward me, his movements fluid, but strange. There was a heaviness to his step, a lack of that precise, predatory grace I had come to associate with him. "It's late," I said, confusion creeping back in. "Is everything okay? Did something happen with the commission?" "Everything is fine," he murmured. He was closer now, rounding the foot of the bed. I needed to see you. I needed to know you were still here." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. It was the vulnerability I had seen on the balcony. So why was every nerve in my body screaming danger? He reached out for me. "Come here, Clara." I took a step forward, drawn by the pull he always had on me. But as I moved, the air shifted. He was close enough now that I could smell him. I stopped dead. Alessandro smelled of expensive scotch, rain, and clean linen. It was a sharp, cold scent. The man standing 3 feet away from me smelled of stale bourbon, sweat, and a cloying cheap cologne that tried to mask the odor of unwashed skin. It wasn't him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The silhouette was right. The height was right. The voice was a terrifyingly close mimicry. But the smell was wrong. "You're not Alessandro," I whispered, horror icing my veins. The figure froze. A flash of lightning lit up the room again, longer this time. It illuminated his face. It was Alessandro's face, the same bone structure, the same dark eyes. But the expression was twisted, manic. The eyes weren't stoic and controlled. They were bloodshot and wild, dancing with a chaotic malice. Matteo. He grinned, and it was a grotesque parody of his brother's rare smiles. "Smart girl," Matteo hissed, dropping the whisper. His voice was slurred, wet with alcohol. "You always were too smart for your own good. That's what he likes about you, isn't it? The brain, the little fire." "How did you get in here?" I demanded, backing away until my legs hit the chair. I kept the taser hidden behind the fold of my silk robe. "The security, the alarms, the tunnel." Matteo laughed, a low, ugly sound. He took another step toward me, his movements jerky. "Did he forget to tell you? The old wine cellar has a delivery hatch that leads to the old Prohibition tunnels. We used to play hide-and-seek down there when we were kids. Alessandro thinks he sealed it years ago. He thinks he knows everything. But he forgot I have a memory, too. He was drunk, dangerous, and he was in my bedroom. "Get out," I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "Alessandro will kill you if he finds you here." "Alessandro is busy," Matteo sneered. I tripped the perimeter alarms on the west gate. "He's out there right now, running around in the rain with his dogs, looking for a threat that isn't there, while the real wolf walked right through the back door." He lunged. It wasn't a seductive move. It was an attack. He cleared the distance between us in a second, his hand shooting out to grab my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I remembered the weight of the gun in the car. The lessons Alessandro had whispered to me about survival. You do not hesitate. I sidestepped his grab, dropping to my knees, and thrust the taser upward into his exposed stomach. I pulled the trigger. The crackle of electricity was deafening in the small space. Matteo convulsed, a guttural scream tearing from his throat as 50,000 volts locked his muscles. He collapsed backward, crashing into the bedside table, shattering the lamp. I didn't wait to see if he was down. I scrambled over the bed, making for the door. "You bitch," he roared. He was fast. Too fast. The drugs or the alcohol must have dulled the pain, or maybe the taser hadn't connected fully through his thick coat. I felt a hand clamp around my ankle. I fell hard, my chin hitting the carpet. He dragged me back, away from the door. I kicked out, my heel connecting with his shoulder, his face, anything I could reach. He crawled on top of me, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you're special?" he spat, saliva hitting my cheek. He pinned my wrists above my head with one hand. "You're nothing. You're a baker, a peasant, and you ruined me. You ruined yourself," I screamed, bucking my hips, trying to throw him off. "He humiliated me," Matteo shrieked, his voice cracking. "In front of the commission, he broke my wrist. He took my birthright, and he did it for you." He reached into his boot with his free hand. Metal flashed in the darkness. A knife. A serrated hunting knife. "If I can't have the family," Matteo whispered, pressing the cold blade against the pulse of my neck, "then he doesn't get to have the girl." I stared up at him, at the eyes that were so like Alessandro's but completely empty of his soul. I knew with absolute certainty that he was going to kill me. Not for money, not for a bet, but because I was the only thing he could break to hurt his brother. "Do it," I gasped, staring him down. "But he will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Let him come." Matteo raised the knife. The door to the bedroom exploded inward. It didn't open. It shattered. The wood splintered around the lock as a force of nature kicked it in. Matteo flinched, turning his head. Alessandro stood in the ruins of the doorway. He was dripping wet, his chest heaving, a gun in his hand. But he didn't fire. He couldn't. Matteo was on top of me. The shot was too risky. Alessandro didn't need the gun. He dropped it. He moved faster than I thought a human being could move. He was a blur of darkness and violence. He crossed the room and tackled Mateo off me, the force of the impact sending them both crashing into the wardrobe. The wood cracked. Mirrors shattered, raining shards of glass onto the carpet. I scrambled backward, gasping for air, clutching my throat where the knife had pressed. The two brothers were a tangle of limbs on the floor. It was like watching a mirror image fight itself. They had the same build, the same strength, but Alessandro fought with a cold, terrifying precision, while Mateo fought with the desperate flailing of a drowning man. Mateo slashed with the knife. Alessandro caught his wrist, the same one he had broken at the gala. He twisted it. The sound of the bone snapping again was sickening, a wet crunch that made my stomach turn. Mateo screamed, dropping the knife. Alessandro didn't stop. He punched Mateo in the face. Once, twice, 3 times. Each blow was a heavy, meaty thud. He wasn't fighting to subdue. He was fighting to erase. "You touched her!" Alessandro roared, his voice unrecognizable. It was guttural, animalistic. I told you what would happen." He dragged Mateo up by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him against the wall. Mateo's face was a ruin of blood and bruises. He was barely conscious, his legs dragging on the floor. Alessandro wrapped his hands around Mateo's throat. His biceps bulged, the veins in his neck straining. He was going to kill him, right here, right now. He was going to snap his own twin's neck. "Alessandro!" I screamed. He didn't hear me. His eyes were fixed on his brother's face, wide and unseeing, lost in the red haze of berserker rage. "Die," Alessandro whispered. "Just die." Mateo clawed feebly at Alessandro's hands, his eyes rolling back in his head. I couldn't let this happen. Not because I cared about Mateo. I wanted him dead for what he had done, but because if Alessandro killed his brother with his bare hands in my bedroom, he would never come back from it. It would destroy the part of him that was still human. It would make him exactly what Mateo claimed he was. A monster. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the glass cutting into my bare soles. I ran to them. I didn't pull on Alessandro's arm. I knew I couldn't move him. I placed my hands on his face. "Alessandro!" I shouted, forcing him to look at me. "Look at me!" He didn't blink. His grip tightened. Mateo made a choking, gurgling sound. "Alessandro, stop!" I pleaded, pressing my forehead against his cheek. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the tremors of rage shaking his massive frame. "He's defeated. It's over. Don't do this. He touched you." Alessandro rasped, his eyes still locked on Mateo. "He held a knife to your throat. And he failed," I said firmly. "I'm alive. I'm right here. But if you kill him now, you lose. You become him." Alessandro's eyes flickered. He looked down at me. He saw the terror in my face. Not terror of Mateo, but terror for him. "Don't stain your soul for him," I whispered, my thumbs stroking his cheekbones, smearing the blood that had splattered there. "And please, don't dirty the carpet. I just got the stain out from the wine." It was an absurd thing to say. Ridiculous. But it was domestic. It was grounding. It was something Clara the baker would say, not a mafia victim. It broke the trance. Alessandro blinked. The murderous haze receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He looked at his brother's purple, gasping face. He looked at his own hands wrapped around Mateo's throat. He released him. Mateo crumbled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings, coughing and retching, curling into a fetal position. Alessandro stepped back, chest heaving. He looked at his hands, then at me. He reached out, touching my neck where the knife had been. "Did he cut you?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No," I said. "Just a scratch. I'm okay." He pulled me into him, burying his face in my hair. He held me so tight it hurt, but I didn't complain. I held him back, anchoring him to the earth. "I should have checked the wine cellar," he muttered into my hair. "I should have known. I was arrogant." "You came," I said. "That's what matters." The sound of running footsteps echoed in the hallway. The security team finally arrived, guns drawn, looking panicked. They stopped at the door, taking in the scene, the shattered wardrobe, the unconscious brother on the floor, the boss covered in rain and blood holding me. "Boss!" The head of security gasped. The West Gate alarm was a diversion, Alessandro said coldly, not letting go of me. He turned to face his men, his mask of command sliding back into place, though it was cracked. My brother utilized the old Prohibition tunnel. Secure it. Weld it shut. Pour concrete into it if you have to. Yes, sir, and… Him? The guard pointed at Matteo. Alessandro looked down at his twin. There was no love left in his eyes. There wasn't even hate. There was just nothing. Take him to the holding cell in the basement, Alessandro ordered. Call the doctor to set his arm. I want him conscious for the council meeting. You're not… killing him? The guard asked, surprised. Death is too easy, Alessandro said. He wants to be a martyr. I'm going to make him a ghost. The guards dragged Matteo out. He groaned as they moved him, leaving a smear of blood on the pristine cream carpet. Alessandro watched them go, then turned back to me. He looked at my feet. You're bleeding, he said. I looked down. There were small cuts on my feet from the mirror shards. It's fine. I didn't feel it. He didn't speak. He scooped me up into his arms, carrying me out of the ruined bedroom. He didn't take me to the guest room. He walked down the hall to the west wing to his own suite. He kicked the door open and carried me into his bathroom. He set me down on the edge of the massive marble tub. He grabbed a first aid kit from the cabinet and knelt at my feet. He cleaned the cuts with gentle, precise movements, his large hands incredibly tender. He didn't look up as he worked. This house is compromised, he said quietly. Matteo is in the basement, I reasoned. It's over. No, Alessandro said, bandaging my foot. He sold the root. I heard him muttering it when I had my hands on his throat. He didn't just come here to kill you. He came here to create a distraction while he signaled the Russians. He stood up, washing the blood from his hands in the sink. He looked at me in the mirror. They know the layout now. They know the security protocols. Matteo has been talking to Petrov for weeks. The Westgate alarm wasn't just him. It was a test run. He turned around. We cannot stay here. Where do we go? I asked. The bakery is a construction site. My apartment isn't safe. There is a safe house, Alessandro said. In the Catskills. It is off the grid. No digital footprint, no tunnels. When do we leave? Now, he said. Pack a bag. Warm clothes. We leave in 10 minutes. Alessandro, I said, stopping him as he moved to the door. Are you okay? He stopped. He looked at his hands again. I almost killed him, Clara. I wanted to. I enjoyed the thought of it. But you didn't, I reminded him. You chose not to. I chose you, he corrected. I stopped because you asked, not because I felt mercy. He walked over to me, cupping my face. That is why I need you. You are the only thing keeping me from becoming him. He kissed me hard, a kiss that tasted of iron and desperation. Get dressed, he ordered, pulling away. The car will be waiting. I nodded, rushing to grab what I could. But as I threw sweaters into a duffel bag, a cold knot of dread settled in my stomach. We had survived the fire. We had survived the invasion. But now we were running. And in my experience, running only worked for so long before the wolves caught up. I looked at the burgundy dress hanging in the closet, the armor I had worn to the gala. I left it there. Where we were going, velvet wouldn't save me. I grabbed the heavy boots, the jeans, and the taser. 10 minutes later, we were in the armored SUV, speeding away from the mansion as the storm raged on. Alessandro drove this time, his knuckles white on the wheel. I watched the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following us. There was nothing but rain and darkness. But as the silhouette of the Versiani estate disappeared behind the trees, I knew the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. The rendezvous point was a derelict warehouse on the edge of Yonkers, a skeletal structure of rusted steel and broken concrete that looked abandoned to the rest of the world. To Alessandro Versiani, it was a staging ground. We had switched vehicles there. Leaving the SUV, we had fled the mansion in for something that looked less like a car and more like a tank wrapped in civilian luxury. It was a customized, armored transport, black and imposing, sitting in the center of a convoy of 3 identical vehicles. I sat in the back of the middle vehicle, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. I clasped them together to stop the motion, hating the physical betrayal of my nerves. Beside me, Alessandro was a statue of concentrated energy. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid-fire Italian, his voice low and lethal. He hadn't touched me since we got into the new car. He was in war mode, his mind moving pieces on a chessboard I could barely see. "The route is compromised," he said into the phone, then listened. "No. Matteo didn't just sell the location of the mansion. He sold the contingency plans. He knows about the Catskills." My stomach dropped. The safe house. He hung up and looked at the partition separating us from the driver and the bodyguard in the front seat. "Silas," he barked. "Change the route. Take the secondary mountain pass. Stay off the main highway." "Yes, boss," the driver replied, his eyes meeting Alessandro's in the rearview mirror. Silas was a mountain of a man, former special forces, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. If he was worried, he didn't show it. Alessandro turned to me. In the dim blue light of the car's interior, the bruises on his knuckles, fresh from beating his brother, looked black. He reached out and covered my clasped hands with his own. His palm was warm, rough, and grounding. "We are going dark," he said. "No phones. No signals. The Russians have tech that can triangulate our position if we stay connected." "The Russians?" I whispered. "Matteo sold us to the Bratva?" "He sold a map," Alessandro corrected, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles. "He told Petrov where to find us. Petrov has wanted my territory for 5 years. Matteo gave him the key to the front door." "Why?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Why would he destroy his own family? Because if he can't rule the kingdom, he would rather see it burn," Alessandro said. "He is a child with a matchbox." The convoy began to move. We rolled out of the warehouse and onto the dark, slick roads leading north. The rain had turned into a mix of sleet and snow as we climbed in elevation, coating the windshield in a gray slush that the wipers fought to clear. I leaned my head back against the leather seat, closing my eyes. I tried to summon the feeling of the velvet dress, the power I had felt at the gala, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Tonight I was wearing jeans and heavy boots, a fugitive in a war I hadn't started. "Distinctive," Alessandro murmured. I opened my eyes. He was watching me. "What?" "You are thinking too loud," he said. "Stop calculating the odds, Clara. That is my job." "I'm not calculating odds," I admitted. "I'm thinking about the eggplant parmigiana. It's still sitting on the counter. Cold." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, softening the harsh lines of his face. "When this is over, I will buy you 1,000 eggplants. We will make a feast." "When this is over," I repeated. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. The car banked sharp left, leaving the paved road for a gravel track that wound up into the dense forest of the Catskills. The trees pressed in on either side, tall pines weighed down by snow, creating a tunnel of shadows. The convoy slowed. The lead car was about 50 yards ahead, its taillights 2 red eyes in the darkness. The tail car was the same distance behind. "Silas, status," Alessandro commanded. "Visibility is poor, boss," Silas reported. "Thermal is picking up deer, but nothing else. We're 5 miles from the safe house. 5 miles. 10 minutes. I started to relax. Just a fraction. I looked out the window at the passing trees. Then the world exploded. It didn't start with a sound. It started with a flash. A blinding, white-hot streak of light that tore through the darkness ahead of us. It struck the lead car. The impact was visceral. The vehicle 50 yards ahead of us didn't just stop. It disintegrated. The fuel tank ignited instantly, sending a fireball rolling into the night sky, turning the snow into steam. The concussion wave hit us a second later, shaking our heavy armored car like a toy. "RPG!" Silas screamed, slamming on the brakes. "Ambush! Ambush front! Reverse!" Alessandro roared, throwing his arm across my chest to pin me to the seat. "Get us out of the kill box!" Silas shifted gears, the engine screaming as he tried to back up. But before we could move more than a few feet, a second explosion rocked the world behind us. The tail car. They had hit the front and the back. We were trapped. "They boxed us in," Alessandro snarled. He reached for the door handle, his other hand going for his gun. "Get down, Clara! On the floor!" I unbuckled my seatbelt and scrambled down into the footwell, curling into a ball. RPG! 3 o'clock! Silas yelled. I looked up just in time to see a trail of smoke rushing toward the passenger side of our car. Alessandro dove on top of me, covering my body with his. The impact was deafening. The missile didn't penetrate the cabin, the armor held, but the force of the blast lifted the 3-ton vehicle into the air. We flipped. Once. Twice. The world became a violent centrifuge of breaking glass, screaming metal, and darkness. The car landed on its side with a bone-jarring crash that knocked the wind out of me. Silence. For a long moment, there was only the high-pitched ringing in my ears and the hiss of escaping steam. I blinked, trying to make sense of the orientation. I was lying on the ceiling of the car, or the door. I couldn't tell. Alessandro, I croaked. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of propellant. Clara, his voice was strained, tight with pain. I shifted, pushing debris off my legs. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the interior in a ghostly red glow. Alessandro was above me, or beside me, depending on the angle. He was pinned. The roof of the car had buckled on his side, crushing inward. His right leg was trapped tight under the crumpled metal of the front seat partition. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, reaching out to touch my face. His hand was shaking. Blood was running down his temple from a cut on his hairline. "I'm fine," I said, scrambling to my knees. "I'm okay. But you're stuck." I tried to push against the metal beam trapping his leg. It didn't budge. It was solid steel, bent like a paperclip by the force of the explosion. "Leave it!" he gritted out, wincing as he tried to pull his leg free. "Silas! Status!" There was no answer from the front. I looked through the shattered remains of the partition. Silas was slumped over the steering wheel. A piece of shrapnel from the windshield had... I looked away, bile rising in my throat. Silas was gone. The bodyguard next to him was motionless. "They are dead," I whispered. "Then we are alone," Alessandro said. He stopped struggling and looked at me. His eyes were clear, focused, terrifyingly calm. "Clara, listen to me. They will come to check the kill. They won't fire another RPG because they want to confirm the body. They want to see me dead." "We have to get you out," I said, panic rising. "There is no time," he said. "You have to go." "No," I said instantly. "I'm not leaving you." "You are small," he said, ignoring my refusal. "You can fit through the gap in the rear window. The glass is broken. Crawl out. Run into the trees. Hide. Do not come out until you see the backup team. I am not leaving you here to be executed." I screamed at him, grabbing his lapels. "If you stay, you die," he roared back, the vein in his neck bulging. "Go! That is an order." "I don't work for you anymore," I yelled. "I'm your partner, remember?" I looked around the cabin frantically. We were sitting ducks. If the Russians walked up to the car, they would shoot us through the gaps in the armor. We had no angle. We were trapped in a steel coffin. My eyes landed on the front section of the cabin. The bodyguard, his name was Marco, I remembered with a pang of guilt, had a weapon, an assault rifle. It had fallen from his hands and was lying on the roof of the car, just within reach of the broken partition. I looked at Alessandro. He was trying to reach his own handgun, but the angle of the crush made it impossible to draw from his holster. He was defenseless. "They're coming," Alessandro whispered. I could hear it now, crunching snow, voices shouting in Russian. They were moving in. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I moved. I squeezed my body through the jagged hole in the partition, ignoring the glass that sliced into my jacket. I reached out and grabbed the cold metal of the rifle. It was heavy, heavier than I expected. It smelled of oil and death. "Clara, no!" Alessandro shouted, realizing what I was doing. "Get back! You don't know how to use that!" I pulled the rifle back into the rear cabin. I checked the magazine like Alessandro had shown me that day in the library, when he insisted I know the basics of every weapon in the house. "It is simple mechanics," he had said, guiding my hands. "Magazine in, bolt forward, safety off, point and squeeze. Do not close your eyes." I crawled toward the rear window, the one Alessandro had told me to use for escape. It was shattered, leaving a jagged opening about 2 feet wide. I peered out. Through the snow and the smoke of the burning lead car, I saw them. Shadows moving in the tree line. 6 men. They were moving tactically, weapons raised, closing in on our overturned vehicle. They were confident. They thought everyone inside was dead or incapacitated. I rested the barrel of the rifle on the rim of the broken window. The metal was freezing against my cheek. "Clara," Alessandro said, his voice pleading. "Don't do this. Give me the gun." "You can't shoot from there," I said, my voice sounding strange, detached. "You can't see them." "I can. They will kill you," he groaned, thrashing against the metal trapping his leg. "Not if I kill them first," I whispered. I settled the stock of the rifle against my shoulder. I took a deep breath, the freezing air filling my lungs. I thought about the bakery. I thought about the fire. I thought about Matteo's knife at my throat. I thought about Alessandro bleeding on the floor of this car. I wasn't a baker anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the woman holding the line. I lined up the sights on the closest shadow. Point and squeeze. I pulled the trigger. The noise was apocalyptic. It wasn't a bang. It was a concussive slap that rattled my teeth. The recoil kicked into my shoulder, harder than I expected, throwing my aim off. The first shot went wide, hitting a tree and sending a spray of bark into the air, but it did its job. The Russians froze. They hadn't expected resistance. "Contact! Contact rear!" one of them shouted. I didn't stop. I remembered Alessandro's voice. "Suppressive fire. You don't have to be a sniper. You just have to make them afraid to lift their heads." I squeezed the trigger again and again and again. Bang, bang, bang. The rifle bucked in my hands, a living thing spitting fire. I saw one of the shadows drop, not dead, but scrambling for cover behind a rock. "Get back!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat raw and primal. Bullets began to ping against the hull of our car. Sparks flew as rounds deflected off the armor plating. I ducked down, covering my head as glass and metal fragments rained down on me. "Clara!" Alessandro's hand found my ankle. He was gripping me so hard it hurt. "Stay down!" "If I stay down, they flank us," I yelled back. I popped up again. They were moving to the left, trying to circle around to the side of the car where the undercarriage was exposed. I swung the barrel of the rifle. I saw a man running through the snow, a dark silhouette against the white ground. I led him, just like I led the piping bag on a cake. I fired. The man jerked violently, spinning around before collapsing into the snow. I stopped breathing for a second. I had just shot someone. "Keep firing!" Alessandro roared from the darkness behind me. "Don't think about it. Keep them back." His voice snapped me out of the shock. He was right. If I stopped to process the morality of it, we were dead. I fired again, spraying the tree line where the others were hiding. The magazine clicked dry. "Empty!" I shouted, panic flaring. "Grab the spare," Alessandro commanded. "On the vest! Marco's vest!" I scrambled back to the partition. I reached through, patting down the dead bodyguard's chest until my fingers found the hard plastic of a spare magazine. I ripped it free. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped it. "Calm." Alessandro's voice was suddenly soft, right in my ear. He had managed to twist his body, dragging himself as close as the crushed metal would allow. He reached out and placed his hand over my trembling ones. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Breathe, Clara." I took a breath. I picked up the magazine. I slammed it into the receiver and hit the release. The bolt snapped forward. "I'm ready," I said. "They will rush now." Alessandro warned. "They know you reloaded. Watch the right flank." I moved back to the window. Sure enough, 2 of them were sprinting toward us, using the smoke from the burning lead car as cover. I leveled the rifle. The fear was gone. It had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. This was my territory. This was my man. I opened fire. The first man dove into the snow. The second one kept coming, raising his weapon. I saw the muzzle flash of his gun. A bullet whizzed past my ear, So close I felt the wind of it. I didn't flinch. I aimed at his center of mass. I pulled the trigger. He fell. He didn't get up. 2 down, I called out. Hold the line, Hatesoro. My treasure, Alessandro said. Backup is 3 minutes out. I tracked the transponder. 3 minutes. It sounded like an eternity. For the next 180 seconds, I waged a one-woman war in the frozen woods of the Catskills. Every time a shadow moved, I fired. Every time they tried to advance, I forced them back. My shoulder was throbbing, my ears were ringing, and my fingers were numb from the cold. But I didn't stop. I was the wall. I was the shield. Then, I heard it. Not the crack of rifles, but the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of rotors. Lights appeared above the tree line, blinding spotlights cutting through the snow. A helicopter. A black hawk, unmarked, screaming in low over the treetops. Friendly! Alessandro shouted. It's the extraction team. The Russians realized it too. They broke cover, running back into the deep woods, abandoning the fight. I didn't stop aiming until the helicopter touched down in the small clearing 50 yards away. Men in tactical gear poured out, moving with the same lethal efficiency Alessandro possessed. They secured the perimeter in seconds. Clear! One of them shouted. Only then did I lower the rifle. My strength left me all at once. The adrenaline crash was brutal. I slumped against the side of the overturned car, gasping for air, the rifle slipping from my numb fingers. Clara, Alessandro called out. I turned to him. The red emergency light painted his face in shadows. He was still pinned, still trapped, but he wasn't looking at his leg. He was looking at me. There was awe in his eyes, and something else. Something that looked like worship. You're alive, I whispered, reaching out to touch his face. Because of you, he said. He caught my hand and pressed it to his lips. I told you to run. I told you I don't work for you, I said, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. The rear doors of the armored car were ripped open by the rescue team. Boss! The team leader, a man named Dante, no relation to the brother, looked inside. We have the jaws. We'll get you out. Get her first, Alessandro ordered. Check her for injuries. I'm fine, I said, waving them off. Get the metal off his leg. It took them 10 minutes to cut him free. 10 minutes of grinding metal and sparks. I stayed right there, holding his hand, refusing to leave the car until he did. When they finally pulled the beam back, Alessandro groaned, his face going pale, but he didn't cry out. They pulled him from the wreckage. He couldn't stand. His right leg was a mess of torn trousers and blood, but he was alive. They loaded him onto a stretcher. I walked beside him as they carried him toward the helicopter. The snow was crunching under my boots, stained pink with blood. Some of it mine, some of it from the men I had shot. Before they lifted him into the chopper, Alessandro grabbed the medic's arm. Wait! He looked at me. He reached out his hand. I took it. You didn't just hold the line, he whispered, his voice rough with pain and pride. You became the line. I was protecting my investment, I said, trying to joke. But my voice broke. You still owe me a bakery. He pulled me down, ignoring the medics, ignoring the spinning rotors, and kissed me. It wasn't the searing kiss of the balcony. It was a desperate, grounding kiss. A kiss of survival. I owe you my life, he said against my lips, and I pay my debts. He released me, and they loaded him in. I climbed in after him, sitting on the bench seat opposite the stretcher. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in grease, soot, and blood. They were shaking again. But as the helicopter lifted off, leaving the burning wreckage and the dead bodies in the snow below, I realized the shaking wasn't fear. It was the aftershock of power. I looked at Alessandro. He was watching me, his dark eyes burning with a promise that terrified and thrilled me. The baker was dead. She had died in that overturned car. The woman sitting in the helicopter was something else entirely. She was the partner of a king, and she had just proven she had the teeth to wear the crown. Where are we going? I asked the pilot. The secondary safe house is compromised. Alessandro answered for him. his voice weak but steady. "We are going to the penthouse in the city, the fortress. Back to the lion's den?" I asked. "No," Alessandro said, closing his eyes as the pain meds kicked in. "We are going to the throne room, and then we are going to hunt." I leaned my head back against the vibrating metal wall of the helicopter. I closed my eyes. I could still smell the cordite. I could still feel the recoil of the rifle. I wasn't running anymore. I was hunting. 2 weeks. That was how long it had been since the helicopter lifted us out of the burning woods of the Catskills. 2 weeks of silence, of healing, and of preparing for the final act of a play that had started with a simple, cruel wager. We were staying in the penthouse, Alessandro's fortress in the sky overlooking Manhattan. It was a space of glass and steel, cold and impenetrable, but in the last 14 days, we had made it something else. We had made it a home. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It wasn't silver, the color of the naive girl who walked into the plaza. It wasn't burgundy, the color of the woman trying to prove she could bleed. It was gold, liquid, molten gold silk that poured over my body like a second skin. It was strapless, structured like a corset at the top, flowing into a slit skirt that revealed the faint, healing scratches on my legs from the car wreck. It was the color of victory, the color of the Verciani Empire. "You look dangerous." I turned. Alessandro was leaning against the door frame. He was using a cane, a sleek black ebony wood stick with a silver handle, favoring his right leg. The doctors had saved the limb, reconstructing the crushed bone with pins and plates, but he still walked with a heavy limp. To anyone else, it might have looked like weakness. To me, it looked like survival. He was wearing a black suit, tailored to perfection, to hide the bulk of the bandages on his leg and the gun holster under his arm. His hair was trimmed, the cuts on his face from the glass faded to thin pink lines. But his eyes were the same, dark, intense, and currently devouring me. "I learned from the best," I said, walking over to him. I stopped inches from his chest, reaching up to adjust his tie, a habit that had become our silent language of affection. "Are you ready for this? The doctor said you shouldn't be standing for too long." "I will stand long enough to see him fall," Alessandro said. His voice was grim, lacking the softness he usually reserved for me in private. Today, he wasn't just my lover. He was the capo dei capi, the head of heads. "He's terrified, you know," I said quietly. "My guard told me Matteo has been weeping in his cell for 3 days. "Good," Alessandro said. "Fear is the only language Matteo understands." He thought he could speak power, but he was illiterate. He reached out, his large hand cupping my neck, his thumb resting against the pulse point. "And you? Are you ready to walk into a room full of wolves and tell them you are the one holding the leash?" I covered his hand with mine. I thought about the rifle in my hands in the snowy woods. I thought about the heat of the fire that took my father's bakery. I thought about the girl I used to be, who apologized for taking up space. She was gone. "I'm not afraid of wolves, Alessandro," I whispered. "I'm the one who shot the hunter." He smiled, a rare, sharp expression of pride. "Then let's go. The council is waiting." The meeting was held in the back room of an exclusive cigar club in Lower Manhattan, neutral ground for the 5 families. The air inside was thick with smoke and tension. Security was tighter than the president's detail. Every man at the door patted us down, though they hesitated when they got to me. Alessandro shot them a look that could have frozen magma. "She carries what she wants. Touch her and you lose the hand." They stepped back, letting me pass with the small pearl-handled pistol in my clutch, a gift from Alessandro for our 2-week anniversary of surviving the crash. We walked into the chamber. It was a cavernous room with dark mahogany walls and a round table in the center. 5 men sat there. The Dons, the architects of organized crime in the city. Don Ricci was there, looking older and wearier than he had at the gala. Don Rinaldi, the heads of the Gambino and Genovese factions. When Alessandro entered, the sound of his cane striking the hardwood floor echoed like a gavel. Click, step, click, step. He didn't bow. He didn't apologize for his lateness. He walked to the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat of the chairman, and pulled it out. But he didn't sit. He turned to me and pulled out the chair next to him. "Sit," he commanded softly. A murmur went through the room. Wives didn't sit at the council table. Mistresses certainly didn't. "Versiani," Don Ricci grumbled, taking the cigar out of his mouth. "This is a meeting for heads of families, not for company." Alessandro looked at Ricci. "Clara Mitchell is not company. She is the reason the Russian expansion into the Catskills failed. She is the reason I am standing here." She sits. Ricci looked at me. I held his gaze. My chin lifted, the gold dress catching the dim light. I didn't fidget. I didn't look down. I looked him dead in the eye, just like I had looked at the men in the woods. Ricci grunted, nodding slowly. She sits. I sat. Alessandro took his seat beside me, placing his cane on the table like a scepter. "Bring him in," Alessandro ordered. The heavy double doors at the back of the room opened. 2 of Alessandro's biggest guards dragged a man in. It took me a moment to recognize him. Matteo Verciani had always been the mirror image of his brother. Handsome, polished, arrogant. The creature kneeling on the floor was none of those things. He was unshaven, his face gaunt and sallow. His arm, the one Alessandro had broken twice, was in a heavy cast strapped to his chest. He smelled of fear and unwashed clothes. He looked up, his eyes darting around the room, landing on the Dons, begging for an ally. He found none. Then he looked at Alessandro, and finally, at me. "Clara," he rasped. His voice cracked. "Clara, please, tell him." I looked down at him. I expected to feel anger. I expected to feel the heat of the fire he had set. But all I felt was a cold, distant pity. He was so small. "Tell him what, Matteo?" I asked, my voice steady. "It was just a game," he cried, looking around the table, trying to appeal to the other men. "You understand, don't you? It was a bet, a stupid bet. I didn't mean for it to go this far. She was just a baker. I was trying to have some fun." Alessandro went still. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Just a baker," Alessandro repeated, his voice low and deadly quiet. Matteo flinched. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant, she wasn't part of this. She wasn't supposed to matter. It was $50,000, Alessandro. I did it to get a rise out of you. That's all. You burned her legacy," Alessandro said. "You sold family secrets to the Bratva. You tried to slit her throat in my home. I was drunk. I was scared." Matteo sobbed, crawling forward a few inches. "I'm your brother. We shared a womb. You can't kill me. The law says no fratricide." He was right. The old laws of the Mafia forbade a man from killing his own blood. It was considered a curse. Alessandro stood up. He picked up his cane and limped around the table until he was standing over Matteo. He looked like a god of vengeance, towering over a mortal sinner. "You are right, Matteo," Alessandro said. "I cannot kill you. My blood forbids it. And frankly, death is too easy for you. You want to die. You want to be a tragedy. You want people to say, 'Poor Matteo, cut down by his tyrant brother.'" Alessandro leaned down, gripping Matteo's chin in his hand, forcing him to look up. "But you don't get to be a tragedy. You don't get to be a memory." Alessandro let go and straightened up, turning to the council. "I propose a sentence of damnatio memoriae," Alessandro announced. "Erasure." Ricci nodded solemnly. "The Siberian route." Matteo's eyes widened in true, primal horror. "No," he whispered. "No, Alessandro, please. Kill me. Just shoot me. Don't send me there. The Russians you sold us to?" Alessandro said smoothly. "They are very angry that their investment failed. But I have negotiated a peace treaty with them. The price of peace is you." "No!" Matteo screamed, trying to scramble backward. The guard seized him. "You will be shipped to a labor camp in Oymyakon," Alessandro pronounced, his voice ringing like a funeral bell. "You will have no name. You will have no tongue, for you talk too much. You will dig coal in the frozen earth until your body gives out, and when you die, you will be buried in an unmarked grave in the snow. Clara! Matteo shrieked, looking at me with wild eyes. Help me! I made you famous! I made you who you are! I stood up. The gold silk rustled in the silence. I walked over to where he was kneeling. I looked down at the man who had tried to destroy me for a laugh. You didn't make me, I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. You just lit the fire that forged me. I turned to Alessandro. He said I was a bet. Alessandro looked at me, his eyes softening just for a fraction of a second. He was wrong. No, I corrected. He was right. I was a bet. I looked back at Matteo, who was trembling in the guard's grip. But you forgot the most important rule of gambling, Matteo, I said coldly. Never bet against the house. I turned my back on him. Take him away. Matteo screamed as they dragged him out. He begged. He cursed. He cried. But as the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice, the room settled into silence. Alessandro looked at the council. It is done. The Verciani family is secure. The Bratva is pacified. Does anyone have an objection? Don Ricci stood up. He looked at Alessandro, then he looked at me. He bowed his head, a deep, respectful bow. No objection. Don Verciani. Donna Verciani. The title hung in the air. Donna, wife, queen. Alessandro smiled. He held out his hand to me. I took it. Let's go home, Clara, he said. We have a bakery to open. 6 months later, the smell was the first thing that hit you. A heavenly combination of vanilla bean, roasted espresso, and warm yeast. It drifted out of the open doors of Mitchell and Verciani Patisserie and curled around the block, where a line of people had been waiting since 6 a.m. This wasn't my father's bakery. That bakery was a memory, preserved in photographs on the wall. This was something new. The floors were black and white marble, imported from Italy. The counters were gleaming brass and glass. The chandeliers were crystal. It was opulent, ridiculous, and absolutely perfect. I stood behind the counter, piping cannoli, filling with a speed that came from muscle memory. I was wearing a chef's coat, but it was tailored silk, embroidered with gold thread. Table 4 needs 2 cappuccinos and a lobster tail, a waitress called out. Coming up, I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. I looked over at the espresso machine. Alessandro Verciani, the most feared man in New York, the king of the 5 families, was struggling with the milk steamer. He was wearing a casual white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint scars on his arms. He looked focused, intense, treating the coffee machine with the same seriousness he treated a hostile takeover. "You're scorching the milk," I called out, teasing him. He scowled, tapping the thermometer. "The pressure is inconsistent. I need to have a word with the manufacturer." "It's not the machine, it's the operator," I laughed, walking over to him. I slid my arms around his waist from behind, resting my cheek against his back. He immediately relaxed, leaning into my touch. "You don't have to work the shift, you know. We have staff. I like the smell," he murmured, turning around in my arms to face me. "And I like watching you boss people around. It's exciting." I rolled my eyes, swatting his chest. "You're impossible." He caught my hand and kissed the flour smudge on my wrist. "I am devoted." The bell above the door jingled. I looked up to see a group of tourists walking in, eyes wide as they took in the luxury of the shop. They didn't know that the man making coffee was a Mafia Don. They didn't know that the woman frosting the cake had killed 3 men in a forest. They just saw a couple in love, running a business. "It's perfect," I whispered, looking around at the bustling shop. My dad, he would have freaked out about the prices, but he would have loved the crowd. He would have been proud, Alessandro said firmly. "You saved his name." "We saved it," I corrected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the counter next to the espresso grinder. "Alessandro," I warned, "we are working." "I have a debt to settle," he said, ignoring me. He opened the box. Inside sat a ring, but not just any ring. It was a massive, emerald-cut diamond, flanked by 2 rubies. It was aggressive. It was beautiful. It was him. "You said once that you owed me $50,000 for the bet," Alessandro said, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear him over the noise of the cafe. "The bet my brother made." I remember, I said, my heart starting to race. I don't want the money, he said. I want to renegotiate the terms of the loan. He picked up the ring. I want a lifetime contract, he said. Exclusive rights, no exit clause. You cook the eggplant. I handle the enemies. And we build an empire on sugar and bullets. I looked at him. I saw the scars on his face, the gray hairs starting to show at his temples from the stress of the last 6 months. I saw the man who had pulled me from a burning building, who had stood in the rain to protect me, who had learned to froth milk because I needed help on a Tuesday. I took the ring from his hand. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Verziani, I whispered. I always win. He smirked. No, I said, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him down for a kiss that stopped the entire bakery in its tracks. We won. When we broke apart, breathless and smiling, the customers were clapping. Alessandro glared at them, and they immediately went back to their pastries, terrified and charmed all at once. He turned back to me, his eyes shining with a light that banished all the shadows of his world. Back to work, Donna Verziani, he ordered playfully. Those cannolis won't fill themselves. Yes, boss, I said. I went back to the counter, the diamond heavy on my hand, the smell of yeast and coffee in the air. The wrong brother had bet against me and lost everything. The right brother had bet on me and won the world. And as I watched Alessandro frown at the espresso machine again, muttering threats in Italian to the steam wand, I knew that this chaotic, dangerous, beautiful life was exactly where I was meant to be. The bet was paid in full, and the payout was forever.